Far View Pitch. Who are you?
Okay, I'm Kris Hardies. I'm a professor of accounting and auditing at the University of Antwerp. And this paper is joint work together with Sanne Janssen, a former PhD student of mine at the University of Antwerp, and Vanstraelen from the University of Maastricht, and Karla Zehms from University of Wisconsin.
What did you study in the paper?
The topic of the paper is professional skepticism, and we study what the main drivers are of auditors taking skeptical actions during their engagements.
Why is it relevant?
So I think the importance of professional skepticism as such doesn't really need to be motivated too hard. I think it's been a topic that regulators and practitioners have stressed as much, if not even more, than academics. So there has been a lot of attention to this topic, not just in the academic literature, but among practitioners and especially among standard setters and regulators as well. I think both standard setters and regulators have quite often pointed to a lack of professional skepticism on behalf of the auditors as a sort of root cause of all the deficiencies and things going wrong during audit engagement. So I think the importance of the topic is pretty indisputable. And then what we did in this paper is, rather than looking at one or two or just a few factors that may affect professional skepticism, we try to get an overall picture of what the most important determinants are. So rather than looking at one or two factors, we looked at a very large set of factors that may have an impact on professional skepticism and examined which of these are the most important ones.
What's new?
So like I was just saying, I think the main novelty of this study is that we don't look at any single factor in isolation. Specifically, there's been a lot of research on professional skepticism, obviously, and most of the factors that we look at have been considered by previous research as well. Where we look at things like motivation, tone at the top, the professional orientation of the audit firm, auditor's personality, the importance of the client, and these sorts of things. So most of these have been considered by prior research, although not all of them. There's a couple of things that we look at that haven't been studied that extensively by prior research. For example, something like personality, but also something like accountability, which is something that we do know plays an important role in accounting settings, of course, haven't really been studied much in the context of professional skepticism. So we do look at a couple of factors that have not received much attention, but I think the main contribution, the main novelty of the current study is that we look at all of these factors all at once, rather than looking at just a few of them and potential interactions between one or two of them. One thing that's not exclusive to our study, but it's, I guess, important to mention, is also that we focus on skeptical actions. So rather than skeptical judgments, we focus on the actions people actually took during their engagements. There have been a few other recent studies that have done the same thing, but actually most of the research on professional skepticism has focused on skeptical judgments rather than skeptical actions. And this is important because, of course, end of the day, skeptical actions are probably more important than the judgments people made. These judgments need to translate into actions, but we know from research that judgments don't necessarily always translate into actions. So the fact that we focus on these skeptical actions rather than judgments is definitely important and relatively novel as well.
What did you find?
Yeah, so I think our findings, it's sort of a pattern of findings, I would say. So the pattern that we find in our data is that let's say the three top factors that seem to have an impact on professional skepticism, skeptical actions, are feelings of accountability, how accountable towards different parties like the audit firm, financial statement users, oversight bodies, the auditors feel while working on their audit engagements. Their trait skepticism, so how inherently skeptical are people. So this is a part of their personality. And then thirdly, their intention to behave skeptical. And maybe this latter one I should explain a little bit briefly, because that may sound like really obvious. If you intend to do something, you're probably going to be more likely to do so. And that's indeed the case. I mean, a lot of research on how people behave shows that the primary determinant of us doing stuff is our intention indeed to do stuff. And that's not a one-on-one relationship. Sometimes we intend to do stuff, and I think we can all imagine situations where we intend to do something but don't. But the primary driver of what we do is intentions. And the subsequent question then is, of course, what has the strongest influence on these intentions? And in our setting, that turns out to be social norms. So the impressions that people have from the people working around them within their firms seem to be a very important aspect there as well. So in brief, accountability, trade skepticism, social norms. That are the three main drivers of trade skepticism, of skeptical actions according to our study.
What can auditors and stakeholders learn from the findings?
Let me put this in a broader picture, because I always feel that regulators and standard setters or practitioners or academics for that matter shouldn't really draw too much conclusions just based on one single study. Even if it's an impressive study, like I would say ours is, it's a pretty impressive study we did. But even then, I think it needs to be looked at in conjunction with other studies. But then I think the two takeaways, I guess, related to what our main findings are. I think the finding that trade skepticism is important is interesting, but it's something that's relatively hard to do much about as a regulator or as a firm, especially as a regulator. As a firm, you can maybe still do something with that. You can screen your employees, and maybe you don't want to keep those that are very low on trade skepticism. But the other two factors that we find to be important are things that, of course, firms and regulators can take into account. The fact that social norms are important and that accountability are important are things that firms can take into account. They can pay attention to their culture, make sure that people do feel accountable to its financial statement users, but also towards the audit firm, that the audit firm places sufficient emphasis on audit quality, and that there are accountability mechanisms and feelings of accountability among auditors. And this also aligns with what we know from other research, of course. There's a recent review published in Behavioral Research in Accounting on accountability research in accounting. Accountability is a major topic in our field, of course. So we know that this is an important thing, and I think that aligns with what we find. So sufficient attention to that seems important, and I guess something I didn't mention before, but that also turns to be not one of the top three, but seems to be a quite important factor determining skeptical actions, is the professional orientation of the firm, the extent to which practitioners feel that their firm is really focused on audit quality, not just on selling services, but really on the quality of their audit engagements. If auditors have that feeling, they feel more inclined to act skeptical on their engagements as well. So I guess all of this relates back to the culture that you have within the firm, and of course that's something that audit firms can pay a lot of attention to. That's entirely within their hands. And similarly, from the regulator's point of view, I guess that stresses that they really should pay attention to the culture to the extent that they're not already doing that, of course. Because I do think there has been quite a lot of stress on culture in accounting firms over the past decade already. But I think that's an area our research sort of suggests that it's right for regulators to examine that and put emphasis on that as well.
What would be the best strategy to read the paper?
Well, I would say read the abstract and then have a look at the different tables and figures. I think especially figure 1 gives a pretty good overview of sort of the overall framework of the paper. Then table 2 is sort of interesting because it gives a lot of detailed descriptions about what our participants look like and the extent to which certain characteristics vary within the sample. And then, of course, the most important table is probably table 4. This may require some understanding of statistical modeling, but table 4 actually shows our results. So if you just look at that table, you can infer for yourself which characteristics, which factors are the most important determinants of skeptical actions.
Thank you, Kris.